This is the LG UltraGear 45GX950A OLED monitor from the company's GX9 gaming series. Big thanks to LG for sending the screen out for testing and for sponsoring this video. It's the first OLED monitor in the world to be released offering a 45-inch ultra-wide screen size and a 5K 2K resolution. This gives you a much higher resolution and pixel density than previous 45-inch OLED monitors, offering a 5120 by 2160 resolution and a pixel density of around 125 ppi. That's a big step up from the 84 ppi of the previous 45-inch OLED monitors, which improves image clarity, sharpness and desktop area in all uses, whether you're gaming, watching videos or using office applications. It's got 123% more pixels in fact than the previous 45-inch OLED monitors available. This 5K 2K resolution, as it's commonly referred to as, is a massive upgrade in the ultra-wide OLED monitor space, being tall enough to handle native 4K vertical resolution content and also offering a lot more vertical space than the 49-inch super ultra-wide screens available, with 50% more pixels overall in fact. That's along with a higher pixel density for a sharper image and crisper text. As LG put it, you can go wider but you don't have to go shorter. The 5K 2K resolution puts the pixel density somewhere in between the 27-inch 1440p and 32-inch 4K panels available today, and the picture quality is great without needing to worry about any kind of OS scaling either. Text is a comfortable size at 100% scaling, so you can take advantage of the massive screen area and desktop space easily. The 45GX950A is built around a new 2025 LG Display WOLED technology panel, offering all of the usual benefits of OLED technology like the near instant response times, true blacks and per pixel level dimming. This model has a steep but very immersive 800R curvature, which we'll talk about a lot more and evaluate throughout this review. Don't jump to any early conclusions on this area yet. A few other features and specs of note include the screen's native 165Hz refresh rate, as well as support for a dual mode function that allows you to double the refresh rate up to 330Hz if you're willing to halve the resolution for certain fast-paced gaming situations. We'll look at that a lot more a bit later on. There's some pretty good integrated speakers, a 4-pole DTS sound headphone jack, hardware calibration support, and modern connectivity with DisplayPort 2.1, HDMI 2.1 and USB Type-C. The DisplayPort 2.1 connection has UHBR 13.5 speeds only, offering 45 gigabits per second of bandwidth, and so you'll still need to use display stream compression to support the 5K 2K 165Hz spec. You can of course still use the screen with a DisplayPort 1.4 graphics card at the same settings and using DSC, but you're going to need a high-end system ideally to power this kind of spec for gaming, so the newer the card the better. Let's get into our testing then. The screen comes out of the box in its Gamer 1 preset mode that operates with the full native colour space of the panel. Of note, the gamma mode is set to mode 2 here. We tested this default configuration as shown. The gamma curve was pretty close to the 2.2 target, measured at 2.13 average, and being a little lower than intended and losing some minor grayscale detail. The colour temp was a little cool by around 5%, especially as you got into the lighter grey and white shades, and the red channel balance was a bit low as shown in the middle graph. This resulted in a higher grayscale inaccuracy in those shades and a slight bluish tint to the white background of Office documents for instance. At this point in our testing, we measured the other available gamma modes in the on-screen menu. Mode 1 behaved as expected, being lower than Mode 2 and measuring very close to 2.0 gamma. Mode 3 was higher and very close to 2.4 gamma. Surprisingly, we found the highest Mode 4 to be seemingly configured to 2.2 gamma as well, being very slightly better than Mode 2, with a 2.15 average gamma measured. Interestingly, in this mode, the RGB balance was more accurate as well, being excellent now and avoiding that slightly too cool appearance we'd seen in the previous default gamma mode 2. White point and average grayscale colour temperature were now excellent, and this resulted in a very accurate grayscale with a Delta E 1.1 average measured. The Mode 4 gamma seems to provide a more accurate setup without any further adjustments needed, so we'll use that from here on. The screen has a wide colour gamut, and this extends a considerable way beyond the sRGB reference space as expected, giving us a 127% relative coverage. There's overcoverage in green and red shades, and this causes some issues with the accuracy of sRGB colours in this mode, which is normal for any wide gamut screen. If we compare the colour space with the DCI-P3 reference, you can see that the panel's native gamut matches this almost exactly, and that in turn results in very good colour accuracy for DCI-P3 colours with Delta E 0.7 average. That's the colour space commonly used for HDR content. You can see that there was also pretty good coverage of the Adobe RGB colour space too, with 95.4% absolute coverage measured, although it does extend a fair way beyond this in red shades, which leads to a 109% relative coverage. You'll need to calibrate the screen to use it more accurately with Adobe RGB content if you need to work with that specific colour space, as LG don't provide any emulation mode for that in the menu for this gamut. LG do, however, provide an sRGB emulation mode in the menu, which can clamp the native colour space of the panel back to the more common reference space used for SDR content and many applications and general uses. Gamma was pretty similar to the native colour space mode, and the same as when we ran in the default mode 2 before. We also had an overly cool and slightly greenish grayscale with a 4% error for white point and a higher delta E of 4.0 average, which wasn't very good in this mode. There's no access to use the other gamma modes in the sRGB preset, but we do have access to the RGB colour channels, so we'll see if we can tweak that a bit in a moment. Importantly, this mode does a very good job of clamping the colour space back close to sRGB, cutting back all of the overcoverage in red and green shades that we saw before. However, because of the overly cool colour temp and the imbalance in the RGB channels, the colour accuracy was only moderate here with Delta E 3.0 average measured. Thankfully, a few simple tweaks in the on-screen menu again, to the RGB channels this time, improves this mode significantly. We now had a much better RGB balance in the middle graph, correcting the colour temp and white point very nicely and improving the overall grayscale accuracy. The greenish tint had now been resolved, and this in turn improved the colour accuracy for sRGB colours significantly, with Delta E 1.2 average measured now, which was very good. This represents a very good sRGB emulation mode that should suit many users nicely. LG also provide a DCI-P3 mode, which may seem a little unnecessary given that the native gamut of the panel is so close to this reference space anyway. This mode is actually configured to a 2.6 gamma target though, as per the DCI-P3 theatre standard. Although somewhat oddly the colour temp is configured to 6500 Kelvin it seems, which is from the alternative DCI-P3 display standard. Anyway, you do still have access to the RGB channels in this mode if you need to adjust that. We found the gamma to be pretty close to 2.6 target, and the RGB balance pretty good too, with only a small greenish tint to grey shades. The higher gamma does crush dark grey detail a bit though, which is common for this configuration. The colour gamut had been clamped slightly further than the native mode, reducing from 101% relative coverage before to 99.7% relative coverage here, although colour accuracy was poor with Delta E 3.6 measured. Unless you specifically want a 2.6 gamma, then you're probably better just sticking with the native mode, like the Gamer 1 preset mode, and adjusting to Mode 4 gamma for a very nice DCI-P3 accuracy. By default, the screen offers a uniform brightness behaviour in SDR mode, with consistent brightness regardless of your window sizes and content, and there's no sign of any ABL dimming, which is great news for office applications. The screen has a typical maximum luminance in this mode of 261 nits, which is common for modern OLED monitors in SDR usage, and only a little bit lower than the specified 275 nits typical brightness spec. LG also provide a setting in the on-screen menu for peak brightness, which you can use in SDR mode as well. There are settings for low and high available, and these disable the uniform brightness behaviour at different degrees and offer increased brightness capabilities. In the low mode, the screen can now reach a bit brighter for smaller APL scenes, with a maximum of 332 nits measured. ABL dimming is present now at any brightness level as the content changes, but it isn't too aggressive or noticeable in practice. The high peak brightness mode setting pushes things further, with a maximum SDR luminance of 414 nits measured now, but more noticeable ABL dimming as the APL of your content changes. These peak brightness modes are potentially useful for SDR gaming and videos, where you may prefer the capability to reach higher luminance in certain scenes, even if there's some ABL dimming needed in other situations. That's less noticeable in dynamic content, so it's nice to see that option available so that you can choose. You'll probably be best to stick with the off mode for desktop apps and office work though, or perhaps use the low mode if you need a slightly brighter middle ground. After calibration and profiling, we had achieved a very accurate setup here, helping to correct the gamma, colour temp and grayscale even further, while also improving the shadow detail. We calibrated the screen in its native gamut mode within the user preset, with the colour space mapped back to sRGB for our profile, and that's used in colour aware applications. This gave us very good colour accuracy, as you would hope. You can find our best settings guide for this screen linked in the description below, covering SDR and HDR modes, as well as loads of other settings. If you want to try out our calibrated ICC profile too, you can find links to that in our database linked in the description below. Unlike all of the other consumer OLED monitors from other brands so far, LG also support hardware level calibration from their OLED monitors. This allows you to calibrate the screen's internal lookup table for improved levels of accuracy. This is also useful so you don't need to worry about which applications can use an ICC profile, with the calibration being carried over into all applications, including games and videos too, as it's stored in the monitor itself. You can use LG's free Calibration Studio software for this, which supports a wide range of third-party calibration devices. They're sold separately. This includes loads of the popular devices from X-Rite, like the i1 Pro, i1 Display Pro and ColorMonkey for instance, or devices from Datacolor like the Spider series devices. The software is very straightforward to use, and you can define your targets for color gamut at the top, which includes preset options for sRGB and DCI-P3 for example. For some reason there's no option to choose Adobe RGB here, but you can select the manual mode and enter the target RGB coordinates easily enough. You can also define your target brightness, color temp and gamma here. The whole process is automated once you've positioned your meter and clicked a few buttons, and it takes around 15 minutes to complete. Afterwards, you're presented with various validation reports and stats as well. So if you've got your own calibration device, this feature provides a quick and easy way to configure the screen to different targets and modes, and it's especially useful should you want to configure the screen to anything other than the common default modes, gammas and color temperatures. When it comes to gaming, the 45GX950A has a native 165Hz refresh rate and supports adaptive sync for VRR from compatible systems, with the screen being certified under the NVIDIA G-Sync compatible, AMD FreeSync Premium Pro and VESA adaptive sync schemes. The high 5K 2K resolution and decent pixel density provides a very sharp and clear picture for gaming, a noticeable and significant step up from older, low resolution 45-inch OLED monitors, with amazing immersion due to the very large screen size and wraparound feel of the steep curvature. You'll need a big desk to accommodate such a huge screen like this of course, but if you've got the room, it's really great. I have to say I've not really been a fan of steep 800R curvature in the past, but having used this large screen for an extended period of time, it's surprising how comfortable you get with it on a larger format display. We've used the same 800R curvature on smaller 34-inch ultrawides before, and that felt too much honestly on a screen of that size. Even more so when there's a steep curve on small 16:9 aspect ratio 27-inch and 32-inch monitors. We're not a fan of the steep curves on those at all. But on a much larger 45-inch ultrawide monitor like this, it's a lot better we felt, and certainly for up-close viewing positions and PC gaming, it helps bring the edges of the screen into a better viewing position. Certain game genres, like racing games for instance, as was being demoed at CES in January, really lend themselves well to this screen format. From the right viewing distance, it feels very immersive and comfortable and avoids image distortion or unnecessary neck movements and creates a wraparound feel for gaming. The screen feels very curved when you first unbox it and set it up, but we would advise you to give it a bit of time to get used to. After a short period of usage, you actually get quite used to the curve, and I was surprised to be honest. I didn't expect to like it at all, but my views are changing a bit I think for these very large screen sizes. It won't be for everyone of course, some people will like it and others won't, but we'd encourage you to not rule the screen out based on initial concerns about a steep curve, or even based on previous experience with curved screens until you've used one that's as large as this. The curve is more suited to close-up PC gaming, and if you sit further away and use a gamepad for instance, or play from a console, it might not be as convenient. Same thing goes if you're watching movies from a distance, as finding the right viewing angle and position is a little bit more tricky. It's really aimed at users who sit optimally around 80 centimeters distance from the screen from a central viewing position. If you're really dead against any curve, or you want more flexibility for a subtler curve or even a flat screen, then LG will be releasing a motorized bendable model later in the year too, which would be worth keeping an eye on. We'll talk more about the curve again later on when we're considering other uses like office applications too. The screen provides 50% more screen resolution area than a 49-inch 32:9 aspect ratio super ultra-wide panel, with a higher vertical resolution that gives a more comfortable ultra-wide format we felt. The 32:9 super ultra-wide screens are great for split-screen office multitasking, but feel too wide in many situations and lack the vertical height that we would like. often feeling quite short in practice. We don't need to say much about the response times, which are excellent as always from this panel technology. We measured at a 0.51 milliseconds grey to grey average, which remains consistent at all refresh rates and across the VRR range, all without any overshoot to speak of, which is great for nice, clean and fast pixel transitions. They're easily able to keep up with the refresh rate of the panel. When it comes to gaming experience, we've provided some pursuit camera photos here which demonstrate real-world perceived motion clarity of the panel, which sits somewhere close to the performance of the 175Hz OLED panels we've tested in the past. It's not quite as clear and smooth as the common 240Hz OLED screens, but it still provides very good motion clarity for gaming, along with support for high frame rates. On an OLED panel, this 165Hz is roughly equivalent to an LCD refresh rate of around 250Hz in practice, so that's certainly not slow. You can get further small improvements in motion clarity and frame rate support if you move up to higher refresh rates like 240Hz and then 360Hz or even 480Hz now in the OLED market. But those are not available at this time on a screen of this size and resolution. And to be fair, it's going to be very hard to power that kind of spec from even the most modern systems. Some people may want a higher refresh rate like 240Hz, but the 165Hz panel is still very capable here, we felt. For those who want a higher refresh rate, there is also a dual mode function feature on the screen, allowing you to double your refresh rate up to 330Hz if you drop your resolution by half. But this gives you the flexibility to prioritize frame rates and speed for certain gaming situations, or image quality and detail for others. That's a feature we like and expect some gamers will enjoy. So for instance, you could switch to the dual mode for fast FPS games and switch back to the native mode for RPG games. There's 8 different modes available to select in the menu as we've listed here, including several that simulate ultra-wide screen sizes like 39-inch and 34-inch if you want a smaller area to focus on or you don't want that lower resolution stretched over such a large screen area. There's also others that simulate various 16:9 aspect ratio sizes right down to 24 inches at 1080p. There's a quick launch button on the bottom edge of the screen to enable dual mode, which takes around 4 seconds to activate, and all of those modes can run up to 330Hz refresh rate, which gives you higher frame rate support and improved motion clarity and overall latency. You can also control dual mode via the main on-screen menu or via LG's switch software if you want. Here's some more pursuit camera photos, again capturing the real-world perceived motion clarity in native mode and with the dual mode active, where you can see the decent improvements in motion clarity available from this mode and that higher 330Hz refresh rate. The picture obviously doesn't look as sharp and clear at a low resolution, and it's probably better suited to more distant viewing positions as a result. Using the smaller screen size areas like 39-inch and 34-inch helps too, and we expect those will be preferable to gaming on a full 45-inch screen size at this low resolution of only 2560 by 1080. From a DisplayPort 1.4 NVIDIA graphics card, there's no access to their DSR or DLDSR scaling technologies unfortunately in native mode, and there's no option in the menu to disable DSC, which could have potentially given access to it, but at limited refresh rates. The nearest setting to that is using the DisplayPort 1.2 input compatibility version setting, which disables DSC and gives you access to those features, but also massively limits your available resolution and refresh rate. The maximum you can now select is 3440 by 1440 at 100Hz in this mode, so that doesn't really seem worth it at all. If you have a modern NVIDIA RTX 50 series graphics card, DSR and DLDSR should be available, we believe. Although we've not yet got a card to test this out, but we'll do so in the near future and pin a comment below to update you. Having said all that, the value of DSR and DLDSR is somewhat questionable on a 5K 2K resolution screen like this anyway, so it may be irrelevant to most people. You can, however, use those features when running in dual mode at its 2560 by 1080 resolution and up to the maximum 330Hz refresh rate, so that might be more useful to some people to scale the resolution and improve image detail if your system can handle it in that mode. It's good to see them available in that configuration. Input lag is super low at the native refresh rate and in dual mode, so should be perfectly fine even for competitive gaming. It's a little bit higher for devices with a fixed 60Hz input, although not bad at all compared with many monitors. Keep in mind it's the 165Hz figure that is going to apply for VRR PC gaming, so in the vast majority of situations you'll be getting that super low lag anyway. The screen unfortunately lacks any black frame insertion function to improve motion clarity in gaming, and there's no added VRR anti-flicker options either, which can sometimes help limit the VRR range to reduce any flickering that you might experience in some situations. We'd like to see LG explore these features in the future for their OLED gaming monitors. Console support is very good, with various aspect ratio control settings available in the menu to give you black borders down the sides and the proper 16:9 aspect ratio output that you need, including a 37-inch screen size with 1:1 pixel mapping for a sharp, accurate and clear 4K image. You get a full 4K resolution support natively thanks to the vertical space of the 5K 2K resolution, with 4K 120Hz supported, along with HDMI VRR. There's no HDMI CEC setting unfortunately to auto switch over to the HDMI input when you power the console on, which could have been handy, and there's no Dolby Vision HDR support on this screen, just normal HDR10 content support. There's some pretty decent integrated speakers, which are very useful for consoles so that you don't have to worry about a separate soundbar or system. The screen can handle consoles nicely, but we'd recommend a fairly close-up viewing position to maximise immersion with the curve and avoid image distortion if you're sat too far away. The screen is also mostly well suited to office and productivity uses, certainly offering a massive screen size and large desktop area for split screen work and multitasking. With a 125 ppi pixel density, you can run the 5120 by 2160 resolution at 100% scaling, which gives you usable and comfortable text size, and you can therefore take advantage of that very high resolution and desktop space. You just need to be mindful of using an OLED monitor for static content, as there's a risk of image retention and burn-in for these kind of screens. As we said earlier in the gaming section, we got pretty used to the 800R curvature on a screen this large after a bit of usage, and we found it comfortable for multitasking and general uses too. That was all without needing to move your head around as much or peer towards the edges of the screen. The curve helps bring those edges closer to you, and that works nicely from a central viewing position. Like I said earlier, I've not been a fan of steep monitor curves on smaller screens, but I was surprised how much I got used to it on something of this size. If you're working with a lot of straight lines in spreadsheets or design work, then the curve might be more problematic, but like I said earlier, don't dismiss this curvature here until you've tried it on a screen this big. The steep curve can make panel uniformity more difficult as well, but our unit showed overall pretty stable luminance across the screen, but did dip a bit by around 50 nits along the right hand side edge. But unless you're viewing full screen colour blocks, you're unlikely to notice any issues with this in normal usage. The WOLED panel features LG Display's latest subpixel layout that helps improve text clarity and reduce fringing and blurring. This is updated from the previous 45-inch Ultrawide OLED panels from a couple of years ago, with the layout improved as shown here. That change alone has done a pretty nice job of improving the text clarity of WOLED panels in general, and it's even more drastic here on the 45-inch OLED panel due to the major upgrade to the resolution and pixel density compared with the older 45-inch OLED panels. It doesn't look quite as clear as the 32-inch 4K WOLED panels, which have an even higher pixel density, but from a normal viewing position on a screen this large, it looked very good. It's a little more blurred than on an LCD screen of a similar pixel density, but we'd say it's overall very good on a screen with this updated pixel layout and the updated pixel density. Note that some of the preset modes operate with a different sharpness setting than the default 50, so if you see changes in text clarity when you change between the modes, that will be why. The screen has a matte anti-glare coating which does a good job of handling glare and reflections, much more so than glossier OLED screen coatings on some other screens. This makes it more well suited to use in brighter room environments and during the day, and you don't need to be as worried about the positioning and brightness of your light sources as you do on glossy panel coatings. There's no visible change to the appearance of the coating in side-by-side tests with the previous WOLED monitors, with some slight graininess to the image visible on white office documents. The design of the screen is clean and simple with a four-side borderless design and thin black panel edge, and it feels modern and not as gamery as many OLED monitors. There is some hexagon RGB lighting on the back if you like that sort of feature and you can actually see the rear of the monitor, but it can also be turned off if you want a more professional and simple look or you don't need to use it. The screen settings can be controlled via the joystick on the back of the screen or via various bits of LG software, including the on-screen control software, which also supports firmware updates if needed. Like previous LG OLED monitors, there is a small active cooling fan in the screen, but it remained very quiet during our testing, so shouldn't be a problem unless you've got a completely silent setup and obsess over this kind of thing. There's also a headphone jack provided, as well as some pretty decent integrated speakers. You can get quick access to the volume control by pressing the left or the right joystick toggle, and it's useful to see them included, we think, especially if you're connecting external devices that might not have decent speakers like a laptop or a games console. The stand provides tilt, height and swivel adjustments, which are all smooth and easy to use. We'd have liked a little bit more range perhaps on the side-to-side swivel, and due to the very large screen size there is some wobble to the stand as you move it around or use the on-screen menu, but overall the screen feels very solid, sturdy and well built. You can also VESA mount the screen if you'd rather. There's a USB Type-C connection provided with 90 watts power delivery and DP Alt mode for single cable connectivity from laptops and other devices, and there's some picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture modes available to handle multiple inputs at once. Some people may be disappointed with the lack of a KVM switch function on the screen perhaps for controlling two connected systems from a single keyboard and mouse. You can see the spectral distribution here, which is pretty typical for a WOLED panel. There's no specific low blue light modes available in the on-screen menu, but there is a reader preset mode which makes the image a little warmer but more yellow in appearance. The screen has been certified under various eye care related schemes though, including for low blue light, glare-free performance and anti-flicker operation, which show LG's continued focus on user comfort. We verified the flicker-free performance as shown here as well. When it comes to OLED Care, there is a fairly limited range of options in the menu by today's standards, with only a pixel shifter, screensaver option and image cleaning available. We're used to seeing more options like taskbar detection, logo dimming and the likes nowadays, so it did feel a little bit limited. While it's not explicitly listed on the LG website, LG told us that the screen's 2-year warranty does include cover for burn-in. If you use the LG chatbot on their website now, you can see that this is actually now referenced, although note that it lists 1-year warranty as standard for monitors, but then 2 years cover for certain models. The 45GX950A hasn't yet been added to that list, but their website confirms elsewhere that it's a 2-year warranty on this model. We'd like to see a more obvious promotion of this burn-in cover to be honest, and perhaps an extension to 3 years cover like other manufacturers are offering. We're not sure why there's a reluctance to promote this more widely by LG, as this is a key marketing point consumers should be looking for nowadays on OLED monitors. The 45GX950A is very well suited to HDR content, with its OLED panel offering per pixel level dimming, no halos or blooming, true blacks and basically infinite contrast ratio. The screen supports HDR10 content only, unfortunately not offering Dolby Vision HDR support like some monitors have nowadays. HDR mode works in both native and dual mode operation by the way. The WOLED panel uses micro lens array or MLA plus technology that helps enhance the panel brightness with a 1300 nits peak brightness spec for HDR advertised. With HDR enabled, there's a range of different preset modes that you can use, which all vary based on their peak brightness, color temp and sharpness settings. You can adjust these yourself if you wish in each mode, but the preset values are shown here along with our measurements for peak luminance and white point. The vivid mode is the only one that by default operates with the high peak brightness setting, but that mode is massively oversaturated and artificially enhanced. Based on these initial measurements of each mode, the Gamer 1 mode with its warm color temperature setting seems to offer the most accurate color temperature closest to our D65 white point target. You might wonder if using the manual adjustment would allow it to be even closer, but the manual 0 mode is a little cooler than the warm mode, and moving to the next step warmer in the manual control, which is W1, goes a bit too warm. That's pretty close to the D65 target though if you want to use that instead. The Gamer 1 and Gamer 2 presets carry different preset color temperature and sharpness settings, with both set to peak brightness low by default. You can see here that the Gamer 2 mode is less accurate with a cooler grayscale and a darker than intended EOTF, which makes darker details harder to see. Colour accuracy is also considerably worse due to that cooler colour temperature. If we change the colour temp in Gamer 2 to the warm setting to match the Gamer 1 mode, that makes the RGB balance and colour temp the same, although its colour accuracy is only slightly improved and still lags behind the Gamer 1 mode. So from there we stuck with the Gamer 1 HDR mode and tested it in both peak brightness settings. The EOTF tracking in the low mode is very similar across different APL scenes, and it's very accurate across the grayscale. It's a little darker than it should be in the darkest grey shades, causing some minor loss of detail in near black. There's a familiar roll-off for light grey shades, which helps preserve tonal values a little more since this mode doesn't reach as high brightness. The high peak brightness mode boosts the luminance quite noticeably, but the EOTF tracking is now a bit brighter than it should be, most noticeably in dark to mid-grey shades. but this can help those darker scenes a bit easier to view, particularly in the daytime. This remains a similar story across different APL scenes as well. We expect the high brightness mode to be preferable for most people, as it also gives you access to a much brighter HDR experience, reaching up over the specified 1300 nits in the smallest APL scenes now. The low mode caps out at around 690 nits maximum brightness, although it does show less noticeable dimming during changing scenes as a result. The average grayscale brightness is also compared here, showing that the high mode remains the same in high APL bright scenes, but reaches higher brightness in darker low APL scenes. We also validated this in real-world content, which showed very similar performance between the low and high peak brightness modes in most scenes, but the high mode was able to reach brighter for lower APL darker scenes with bright highlights. Both the low and the high modes have basically the same colour temp, white point and grayscale accuracy, with a small 3% error being slightly too cool. They also basically have the same colour accuracy as shown here in this comparison, which is very good, although the colour gamut is not as wide as QD OLED panels in the Rec 2020 coverage. Between the two brightness settings, it probably just comes down to whether you want the brighter or darker mode. For completeness, here's the EOTF tracking with peak brightness set to high, comparing the Gamer 1 and Gamer 2 modes. The Gamer 1 mode is a bit brighter than intended, whereas the Gamer 2 mode is a bit darker than intended. Along with the better colour accuracy, we prefer the appearance of Gamer 1 overall. The WOLED panel is much better at retaining its black depth in the presence of ambient light sources than competing QD OLED panels that lack a polarizer, and this makes it more suited to HDR viewing in many different ambient light conditions. The matte anti-glare coating helps with glare and reflections, but it doesn't retain black depth quite as well as a full glossy WOLED coating like you'd find in the TV space. It doesn't seem to be as good at holding onto its black depth as other recent WOLED monitors, like for instance this 480Hz WOLED panel, but it's certainly better than QD OLED panels at retaining its black depth in the presence of ambient lighting. We should also mention here one problem that some early buyers have reported. That is a black screen or crashing when enabling HDR when the screen is connected to an NVIDIA RTX 50 series graphics card with DisplayPort 2.1 output. This seems to only happen if you have 10-bit or 12-bit color depth enabled, and LG tell us that this is a bug that NVIDIA are looking into with their 2.1 configuration. As we've commented on in the past, this is one of those risks of developing a monitor with DP 2.1 before NVIDIA cards were even available for testing. The workaround at the moment is just to use the screen in its DisplayPort 1.4 mode by changing it in the menu, which works fine at 5K, 2K, 165Hz and 10-bit color depth anyway. And both the DP 1.4 and DP 2.1 modes need to use DSC anyway. So if you experience problems from an RTX 50, just switch to the DP 1.4 mode in the menu. The LG UltraGear 45GX950A is a fantastic screen with a unique spec and a great feature set. There's no need to recap everything again that we've covered in this review, but we were really impressed by the new 5K 2K panel and the all-round OLED performance. The screen has been released in many regions now, and you can check latest availability and pricing for your region using the link in the description below. Keep an eye on our website as well for updates and news about the upcoming bendable model too. If you've enjoyed this review, please give us a quick like and subscribe below, that would be really appreciated. And if you'd like to help support the content that we produce at TFT Central, you can find links to our Patreon below, where you can also get various benefits like early access to new reviews and articles. Do let us know in the comments section as well if you're thinking of buying one of these new 45-inch 5K 2K OLED monitors, or if you're waiting for something else later in the year. Thank you for watching, we'll catch you next time.